Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on Closing Bell this week. This week's kind of a fun one for me. Brandon's been a good friend of mine for many moons. We went to grad school together. Have some great experiences back in the glory days in Stillwater, America. Brandon McFadden, as a famous person who does applied economics now, is this is the first thing. If you Google him, I think this is what comes up first. But,
is that why you put that up there?
Yeah, I work really hard, so I just go with the first thing that comes up when you Google somebody.
Everyone else does.
Yeah, right. So Brandon was he gave, I think, some keynotes for Bayer. He does a lot of work with advocacy in some cases, and in communications in general, as it relates to especially technology and food and ag. One example that got picked up that you probably have all heard of before is the 80% of Americans would be in favor of DNA labeling. This was like if you remember when this thing came out, it like literally went everywhere. Like this is the Washington Post, like Reason Magazine ran some stuff on it. I don't know where all is that study shown up, Brandon?
No clue.
There's just a million
You
places.
seem to have a better idea about my impact than I do. So
well, I also check everybody's impact.
He's got Google News alerts
Google
for you, Google Scholar alerts for you.
That's just how I am.
He's checking boxes. Like have I got them beat here? I've been in this outlet.
Yeah. Well, you know, Alex has I think 1/20th of the number of citations that you do. So
cool. This is going great. I'm having a really good time.
I didn't realize this was so savage on this show.
Yeah.
Roasty.
So, but Brandon's been doing a lot of work, and so we've been working on some stuff too. Today we're going to talk about this pandemic survey that we've been putting together for feels like a million years. But before we jump into kind of the current research area of the day, I think it's important to probably highlight what's going on this week. So as many of you probably already know, today is September 11th, which kind of reshaped the way that the world thinks in so many ways. Almost 20 years ago now. I was in church actually when September 11th happened. I remember being a kid, and it was like a surreal experience being in church, and then they wouldn't let us leave the church.
Why were you in church?
Yeah,
I went to Catholic school, and we were in mass.
Oh, okay, that makes slightly more sense.
So you were
well, no, I was in mass, but I was also I was in a church, but at school, Catholic.
It happened on a different day for Trey than for the rest of us.
I was sitting here thinking the same thing. I was like, okay, no, that makes sense.
Catholics
that makes sense.
go to church more often than you heathens. So.
Well, fair enough.
But yeah, so it was a Friday morning, and I remember, I think it was Friday morning, right?
Oh, I don't know. It was a school day.
Well, it was either Friday or a Tuesday, because those are the 2 days that we were in church. And so, yeah, no, I just remember everybody panicking, and we were watching it. And I mean, that's like one of those memories that I think sticks with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You guys remember where you were?
Yeah, my mom, I was just kind of getting some stuff going in the morning. And my mom came in and, was talking to me about it. Because it just broke on the news,
You weren't, I gotcha. Because you're from the East Coast originally, right?
No, I grew up in a suburb of Dallas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I feel like you should have been at school too.
Yeah, I was running a little late that morning.
Very late. Yeah, I was in school too, but I would have been in the same time zone, so you were fairly late to school.
I think it was 9 or 10 a.m. maybe.
That's right, yeah.
That week there was a football game at the local high school that we went to, and somebody ran into a light pole, or a power line, and so all of the electricity went out in the football stadium, and it was weird. We thought we were under attack because literally the power went out and everybody's already on edge, and it was surreal. But so that's what's happening, or that's kind of what has been a big point of conversation today. Now, in the current world view, obviously we've had 190,000 people die from coronavirus, but we've been covering that for months and months now. One of the more new developments in what feels like the apocalypse is the fires that are raging across the western United States. So just this week, there are just some incredible photos coming out of San Francisco. If you want to see where the fires are right now, go look at the New York Times fire tracking maps. Actually, the numbers that I just saw on the USA Today post this morning was 10% of Oregon, I think, has been evacuated as of right now. So this is big stuff. I'm not an expert on wildfires, and I don't think any of us are, but it is something definitely keep in mind.
Those pictures are wild.
It's surreal. It's like out of a movie. You almost look at it and you think like, there's no way that's a real picture. Like somebody had to have doctored that.
100% looks like a movie, right? Like.
So Brandon pulled this figure out, and I think it's a really good, important figure here. I feel like every year we do hear somebody talking about historic wildfires. At some point somebody says, this is the biggest wildfire in history or whatever. And in my mind, after a while, I think you almost become numb to it this time of year. But it's the seeing it in data, I think, highlights a little bit better what we're really dealing with. Brandon, you want to talk about this figure real quick?
Yeah, well, so it's just from New York Times. I actually ran across it the other day, and it was kind of funny that I ran across it because exactly like you said, I had, on social media, I'd seen people posting things like, man, like every year it's like the biggest fire, right? Now, it kind of piqued my interest, but then I didn't like run and look at the data or anything. But this popped up in a New York Times article I was reading, and so it kind of answered the question that I was just thinking about. That was kind of on the top of my mind. And in this year, look, what does it say? To August 30th, right? So this is still, so like these numbers, these acres burn are, I don't know what it is now, but I've got to think it's probably, higher than that 2018 number.
The 2019 number is really interesting to me. That, like, I guess I just didn't think about fires last year, but I feel like I did. It kind of has something to say about like recall in general, because like if you were to ask me how many acres burned last year relative to this year, I guess I would assume that it would be less, but I have no idea how much less. Like it feels like it wouldn't be that much less. I don't know. There's a lot of psychology to this.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that, I think Alex made the point that like, that maybe there wasn't as much stuff to burn, right, in 2019 because of the fire.
I just don't know, man. I feel uncomfortable speculating too much about some of this stuff just because I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Yeah. But you do see some years like in like what it looks like 2007, 2008, like some back-to-back big years. So yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, it's really, when you look at it like this, it's really difficult to understand, right? The variation.
I think there are a dozen dissertations you could write on the economics of wildfires that would be really interesting, just as a research project and as it relates to climate change, obviously, but property values and property damage, insurance rates. Okay, so another one that we probably all know a little bit more about is this kind of big blow up. If you remember a few months back when everyone was getting like mystery seeds in the mail, and all of the state departments of agriculture were like, please, dear God, don't plant those. Well, actually, some people did plant them.
They sure did.
They did. I think especially in Arkansas, Brandon. Just so you know, I think Arkansas was a hot spot.
Why did you just call out Brandon right then?
I went to Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the issue is, I think those are just probably good country folk. They appreciate a gift. They said there's a free gift. They're very appreciative.
The one I read said he just wanted to see what would happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, the reality is that I think we were all really concerned that, I don't know, maybe somebody was trying to like introduce new invasive species to the United States or whatever. But what it looks like happened is that there are these companies who are trying to game the review system. And so like on Amazon, for example, which is where a lot of these seeds came from, people would basically buy a seed, or they would fake buy a seed for somebody else. And then those seeds would be shipped to that person who actually didn't order the seeds, so that the person who fake bought them could count that as a 5-star rating for themselves. So this is called brushing. You know, in a world where there's increasingly like a bunch of options, everybody's heard me talk about choice overload before. Reviews and ratings are one way that people try to make sense of the noise. And so these sellers are trying to figure out how to game that system.
Can I just ask, because I'm dumb, why do they then have to actually mail the seeds? If they're both the seller and the sender, can't they just...
Because you have to add in an address, I think. And so they would say that they live at blank address. And then they would have and I think it has to do with shipping rates in the United States versus in China. There's like a bunch of like weird wrinkles to this, but the brushing piece is what I think is super weird, or the weirdest part to me.
So I think Alex, I think that's the right question. But so I received something recently. It wasn't seeds, but it was like a little bracelet, like a little inexpensive. It had to have been, you know, like a 10-cent bracelet or something. And from a China address, and it had my, you know, name, full contact information, you know, the address, my name. It had all my information. I have no idea where it came from. It was one of those things like when it first came, you know, we've been ordering like everyone else, right? We've been ordering tons of stuff. So boxes show up and you're just like, and you really don't even think about it anymore. Well, at least we don't, right? You just get something, you open it, you're like, I know I ordered a bunch of stuff. What's this? And so I open it up and it's this bracelet, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? But yeah, so then I've heard these stories, but I'm with you. I don't completely understand. Maybe they have to prove that they did, you know, maybe, I don't know if
there's the verified
verification,
that, right?
Yeah, like what that verification process is like who's really verifying that. But it may just all be automated, right? Like you've got to show that you shipped to somewhere before you can have a review from that.
Well, because you know Amazon doesn't want this to be happening either. You know, it's not like Amazon wants people gaming their system. So like, of course there are going to be like weird.
Except Amazon. Amazon doesn't want anybody gaming the system but Amazon.
Well, yeah, true.
Oh my gosh.
So
does it cost more to send to Philadelphia or Delaware, wherever you are, than it does to send to San Francisco?
From China?
Yes.
I have no. Are you asking me that? No, I don't.
You're the one that bought the fancy bracelet.
I didn't check I've never shipped anything from China. I don't know the shipping rates.
How dare you come on to Closing Bell and not know those shipping costs? I wonder about the sending it all the way across the U.S. if that's really the story. I don't know.
I mean, I think at least a lot of the stuff I've read is that that's a big part of the story, that people are trying to game the Amazon system.
Did the bracelet look good on you?
It couldn't fit me. It was like for $1 or something. It was so small. Like I said, it was like the most inexpensive looking bracelet you ever had. But while we're talking about this, I was somewhat joking about like this gaming the system. But have y'all like followed like some of the antitrust talks that are going on? Because, you know, it was a marketplace, right? And so like you're saying like, oh, well, it's a marketplace, or it was, right? Now they also sell their own things, right? Amazon Basic, they have their own branded products and everything else. And that's what I was talking about gaming, right? Because they're getting in a little trouble because they're bumping it up to the tops of searches.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, this is a real thing. And so this is like what they think is actually going to get them in antitrust issues is not, you know, being some behemoth, because they've kind of started as a marketplace, and that's the way they've, you know, pitched it to everybody, right? And which it still is. But while it's a marketplace, they've also now started selling their own lines. And so like we just bought some gym flooring, right? And we got Amazon Basics gym flooring, you know, like the rubber like mats, right? That like interlocking. Have you not bought like any Amazon branded stuff? I think we got.
Oh, sure I have.
Yeah,
it sounds a whole lot like what they do at Walmart and Sam's Club too. So
I'm just having a hard time with the legal issues of the antitrust case, but I won't get distracted with that. Keep going, man.
No, that was just it. That was just I've heard like discussions about like how them having their own products could lead them down a road of antitrust issues. And you're right, Walmart, like, so they've got their own products, right? But you know, retailers pay a lot of money for the space on the shelves, right? So, but they do some pricing games, right? Like because they know all the prices, so they you know, this isn't Price is Right. I said pricing games. That made me think of Price is Right. But
Blink it.
Right? That was great. That was a great game. Or it is. I haven't kept up with it. But but yeah. Anyway, so that's why I brought that up.
So one thing that I do want to point out, because I just think is super fascinating. people realize this is an issue, and so there are actually businesses that have sprung up to try to help you figure out what's a fake review and what's a real review. And so here, this is one that's kind of interesting to me. It's just a Google Chrome add-on that's called Fake Spot. So you can drop in the URL from an Amazon product, and it will give you like a prorated star ranking. So it'll be like, this piece of makeup says it's 5 stars, but actually it's 1.5.
Huh.
Wow, really?
Yes. I mean, so this has been a conversation for years.
Dude,
but,
that would be some spicy research if you fed a whole bunch of stuff through there.
Oh my gosh,
inflation. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the future in a lot of ways, is trying to understand how people make choices when they're overwhelmed with a bunch of different weird choices and options.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I mean, I don't know about you two, but I make so many decisions off the number of stars things have. So I really do. Like, I struggle, you know, we're not traveling anymore, but like, even when we're traveling, right? Like, I struggle to think about what people did before Yelp, right? Like, what did you do when you went to a new city, right? I guess you had to talk to people. I guess that's what you did. You had to ask somebody, like, what's good here? But
Rick Steves, I think, is the answer to that, isn't it?
What's that?
Rick Steves has the little travel books that you thumb through.
Yeah. Or what was it? Zagat? I think that was.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you could do that, right? Yeah. But if you're like a person who's traveling a lot, right, you're not going to have but like, I just don't know. It's hard to imagine like what it used to be like. And it's crazy because it's not like it's been around that long. Trey, you remember the good days of Urban Spoon?
It was the best. And then they ruined it. It was, I was so upset. I emailed Zomato when that happened. I was so mad. I sent like a scathing email to Zomato when they bought it out.
How'd that work out?
Did you?
Didn't work.
Prompt
Urban
response?
Spoon stayed dead.
Received a prompt response from the CEO apologizing for the mishap.
Okay, so anyways, let's talk about what we're actually here to talk about.
Cool.
So the thing that we've really been trying to keep track of as ag and food economists is how food and agriculture plays into this conversation about COVID-19. So this is an article that literally was published 5 hours ago on Fox News about people with COVID-19 being twice as likely to report eating at a restaurant before showing symptoms. This is from a CDC study. Now, there are obviously a lot of econometric questions here about trying to infer that the restaurant is what gives you coronavirus. You know, it could be that the people who are going to restaurants are just different kinds of people and they're exposing themselves to different types of risks. You know, there are a lot of things to unpack in this question. But what is important to keep in mind is that food has, since this thing started, been somewhat linked to coronavirus. And at least psychologically, I think people connect those two things pretty closely.
Yeah, I mean, with you know, the first stories really coming out about the markets, right? Like coming, that it originated from a food market. So I mean, especially the early stories tied it directly to a food.
Yeah. Right.
Is that no longer the case? Is the wet market story not the story anymore?
Well, I think there's now some. I think now it's unclear if there weren't cases prior to that case. And
okay.
So,
wow.
And so I think it's a little unclear. I think it's possible that a lot of the, and this is like from what I've read, right? Just a couple of things I've read, that it sounds like that it was tied to that because that's kind of when like the big outbreak happened. They kind of traced it to that, but now they're thinking that there were a couple of undiagnosed cases possibly before like that case.
And who's they?
I guess the Chinese government.
Okay.
So this actually gets into exactly what we're trying to study in this pandemic food and stigma response survey, is we're actually trying to trace what people think about coronavirus over time. And we're asking questions about COVID. So it's a Delaware thing, and then I got tacked on. But our co-authors here are Kent and Mike. So Kent is one of the directors of CBEAR, the Center for Behavioral Environmental Agri-Food Experiments or something.
Center for Behavioral and Experimental Environmental and Risk Management Research.
There it is. So yeah.
I don't even believe Brandon after he said it. I don't think you guys know these people.
I made a note. That's when I looked over here. I have it on a monitor because I wasn't going to try to do what Trey did.
Yeah, no, it's not great. So so this is the team for the most part. We brought on different graduate students and stuff to work on it as well. as you are just talking about the origins of COVID-19, we have asked this question to 1,000 people every month for the last 4 months. How believable is the statement COVID-19 started in a Chinese lab? And I mean, you've probably heard it on Facebook or whatever, people talking about this. Well, guess what? Most people believe that it started in a Chinese lab.
Well, that's a different question. So that's what I was just going to ask you. Why did you ask how believable is rather than do you believe?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question, and that would have been really like a binary thing, though, right? Like, so it would have been a yes or a no, which we could do, right? We could definitely do that. I think this was the way we were phrasing it is just like that. Like, so imagine you hear it, right, or you see it on social media. So it's not necessarily like, do you like, you know? And then if I were to ask something like that, I'd probably, at least just a binary thing, had to ask, something else about like, well, how strong is that belief, right? Like. But the intensity of that, but so this is worded in the sense like you hear it, do you believe it type of, or that's the spirit.
Even though I even worry about that, I'm a lawyer, which means I'm super annoying to talk to.
I did not know I was.
That's not the only reason.
I might not have agreed, but I knew I was going to be recorded.
It's the worst, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder about when you say how believable is the statement, do people infer to me or to the general population, or to whom is the believing happening?
I see.
So
yeah, I'm asking.
Yeah, well, so no, I guess, yeah. So I'm not sure about that. I have no way of knowing that. I do think it's so we don't know. I would say I think it's a bit of a stretch to think that like somebody is going to project that onto society and not internalize it and answer it in the way that they, do they believe it? But I get your point, yeah.
So this gets at like one of those really frustrating things for somebody who does survey research is like you can reframe questions all the time and like try to say like, well, people might think this or that. In this case, to me, that this signals more that there is an extreme level of distrust in the Chinese government with U.S. consumers in general. Because like this to me says, if I asked a random person on the street, they'd be more likely to say, you know what? If somebody told me this started in a Chinese lab, I would totally believe that.
Mm-hmm.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I just wonder about are we believing, how believable is? Are we believing the statement itself? Are we believing Mike Pompeo who's saying this is a probability? Are we believing a media source that says this is a probability? I just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's surveys are what surveys are. I think the point that you're making, we could go test. That's totally an empirical question.
Yeah.
Of like, what type of response would we get if we change the wording?
Yeah. And the way you kind of said it, some people do word things like that, right? Well, in the sense that they say like, instead of saying, what do you do? You ask, what does someone else do, right? Like, what does your neighbor do, right?
And I was mostly just interested, because I'm not a survey guy, I was just interested in why you asked the question that way, rather than accusing you of bad question asking. I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
No, Alex, look, I'm fine with your deposition, okay? I'm completely fine with it. But no, your point's taken. But yeah, I think people are internalizing this, and it's interesting because I have heard this, right? Like, and I mean, not just at the beginning, like I continue to hear this, right? And some people even making the argument that the way it spread and the way it developed so quickly that, it had to have had some help along the way. So even that, right? Like there's a lot of layers to that to unpack, right?
Well, I think this gets to this fundamental level of trust that we are increasingly have to understand how people interact with information. The next point is some information that in my mind is, I mean, it's reported every day that there is, X number of people died from coronavirus in the United States today. But look at the distribution of people who think that it's either underreported or overreported.
Yeah. So, I mean, this looks pretty normal, right? Like this looks like almost a perfect normal distribution.
It does.
A little bit more maybe mass on the overreport. I think I'd run the mean real quick to check that, but yeah. So it looks like you essentially people are about split, right?
Yeah. But I mean, there are a lot of people in there, most people actually, who don't believe that the number reported is the accurate number.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is, sure, I think, super interesting.
Essentially, more than two thirds think that, the reporting is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's not how I interpreted this figure, but I think that's a really interesting way to interpret this figure.
Well, if you want to think about the binary split, and I mean,
I like it.
paper in here
I'm in.
Is maybe a partisan split on this question.
That's what I would guess. Yeah.
Yeah, we could look at that, but yeah, I would guess that too.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even tossing in some question about the trust in the CDC would be something else that might be a moderating variable here. I'm very interested in this question about trust in the institutions that we have right now, and a lot of this data has not been super comforting to the amount of trust that people have in the I don't know, the medical institutions that are underlying society.
Right.
So speaking of trust in the institutions, this is a survey question on your level of agreement with the statement that the government is opening or reopening the economy too slowly. Now, if you'll notice, there isn't a distribution at all right now. It's basically super uniform.
And I'm shocked about that, because I would imagine a lot of people would at least somewhat agree with this, simply because a lot of people, a good decent of people are employed or have been affected, right, by the shutdowns. And so, you would imagine that they have an incentive, right, to want it to be reopened. I guess we can debate that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this is not my argument, but it is an argument that could be made by some libertarians that we've also increased the unemployment money by $600 a week. So the incentive argument kind of gets skewed in that way.
I mean, and it's not just that. I tweeted a story earlier this week that farm income is a 7-year high, and it's because of payouts, at least, and I didn't dig in the data. I don't know to what level, but and then so what this worries me about, right, is inflation, right? Because here so I live in Wilmington, Delaware, and the houses are flying off the market during the pandemic. I mean, and you could explain some of that, right? People are at home more. They might need more space, right? Because you might need offices for your kids now, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, there are a lot of reasonable explanations, but we just hit here. We really just kind of recovered from 2008. The housing prices here did they're just back to 2008 pre 2008 prices, and now they're just so it took that long, right, for those prices to kind of creep back up, and right now they're skyrocketing. Can't keep a place on the market. And I'm just thinking, who's got all this money, or who's not at least a little worried about what life's going to be like in a year? I mean, because even we're not immune, right? We were having this conversation, Trey and I were earlier today, about furloughs, right? Like no one is immune right now, and the housing market here is crazy. And so that makes me think, well, I can tell you, I know we're better off, right? I mean, I'm not spending money on gas. So I think a lot of people are better off from the pandemic. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say.
How just in your own mind, how many people of those are from Philadelphia or from some of those bigger urban places?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I don't know, because I have heard, though, so I'm talking about the prices here. I have heard that if you want a spot in New York City right now, now's the time to do it, right?
Well, I just mean that they're getting out of the cities, going to Wilmington.
Yeah. And that's one, apparently the prices in New York are crashing. Yeah, so that's a very good point. That could be people escaping the cities, because even in Philadelphia, where it hasn't been as bad as somewhere like New York City, it has been bad, and they're still super shut down, right? I mean, they've got really restrictive rules.
And why live in an apartment in the city center of Philadelphia when I have to stay in my apartment, and there's increased risks because we're all sharing the same kind of airflow.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. What's the point of living in an apartment right now? I wonder how much of this is a distribution of people moving from apartment living to house living, just so they can get a little more space.
And the prices in Wilmington are much lower than the prices in. You name it.
Right. Yeah. And you're still here. We're still on the 95 corridor, right? I can hit 9005 with a rock from right here, right? And Yeah, so that's a good point. That could very well be some of the growth in the area.
But again, in this data, if we were just going to look at this binary, most people don't think that the government's acting correctly.
No.
Now, there's a distribution to it, but like if you were to just say yes or no, or make this data 0-1, most people disagree with how things are being handled.
And another way to look at it is, again, it's essentially almost split, right? So essentially what we're saying is no one's happy.
Yeah.
No, well, that's just kind of true in general, right?
Yeah, no one's happy with how it's being handled, or a third of Americans are happy with how it's being handled, maybe.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, interesting. But I will say that more people think that we're opening too quickly than opening too slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
But that's kind of what we were talking about, right? Like there could be an incentive also, right, to not want things to open.
So another piece of this this conversation about trust in the system that we've been trying to track is, well, at least especially just this last month, actually, we threw this question on, or Brandon did, about the development of the vaccine, what the relevance of that vaccine is, particularly with the election coming. You know, there's a lot of components as to whether or not the vaccine can be developed, B, whether or not it can pass the tests, and C, whether or not people are even willing to take it once it gets through the development stages. So just this week, AstraZeneca just hit a wall with their coronavirus vaccine. We don't have to get too far in the weeds on that, but if you want to read more about kind of what happened, Business Insider is probably the best thing to. I liked this article, but Alex, do you want to talk about AstraZeneca a little bit?
No, I think you said it well. I don't think there's much to say. There was someone who had some medical complications, right? Which we don't know if that's an adverse reaction to the vaccine or not. And so they've halted this while they're trying to figure that out. AstraZeneca is one of many, many vaccines in development. So I don't know that there's much to say beyond that at this point, other than what you've got in your survey.
Yeah. Well, and so a poll from NBC found that over half of Americans wouldn't take coronavirus before the election, or a coronavirus vaccine before the election. And so again, this gets into this question about trust in vaccines at this point, which I mean,
that's a different question to me. I
think it's related.
Trust in rushing the system. So people are worried that through some undue weight from the government, they're going to push this thing through before it's been properly regulated.
Yeah, well,
right. That's the concern.
Well, and just there's a temporal component anyway, right? Like there's a debt, like there's a date, right? Like, would you do it by this date? And that date's not too far in the future.
Fair enough. Like, you're right. That could be nope. They need more time to get this sucker safe.
Yeah,
I gotcha.
Because that's one thing. Because Trey's about to go to a question we've asked, and it's a bit of a different distribution, but we don't have a time at it, right? We don't have like a time like, would you do it by this date type of thing.
Well, and it's, if you ask before the election, you're immediately signaling in the person's mind that this is political, that this is a political question. And
well, that's the worry, right? That it's
right.
The vaccine is a political issue.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's an interesting question in and of itself. Do people think the vaccine is a political question? So this is the survey data that we've come up with. Brandon, you want to talk about the question?
Yeah, so it's just, how likely are you to take a vaccine, right, if one's developed? And we see a lot of people that are extremely likely. And this is where I think we're kind of taking this survey. We've done 4 months now. I think this is where we're going to try to transition. We'll probably get rid of some of the food type questions, not all of them. We'll want to track some over time, but I think we'll go more into some of the behavioral stuff and actually some of the perceptions about things like herd immunity and issues like that, and start trying to get an idea because, so I was reading a little bit about herd immunity because I really didn't know much about it. I think the concept is probably pretty intuitive, right? Like what might happen, but I think I read that it was for the measles. I think like 94% of people essentially would have to be immune. So like the number of people that have to be immune to get to herd immunity levels depends on how contagious whatever it is, right? So measles being very contagious, so you have to have like 94%. So essentially like impossible, right? Like
I want you to take your data here and fit it to an epidemiological model of COVID and see if this level of uptake allows us to reach herd immunity. That's a super cool,
that's a great idea
thing to do.
Trey, write that down.
I remember everything.
It's recorded.
So, yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question. I think this science communications aspect of coronavirus has so much to it that like, you know, we've been talking about communication of the value of vaccines for a long time. And now all of a sudden we have like an on the ground example of people trying to think like, well, would I be the first one to take it? Because that's what I start wondering is if I look at this question, it's like you asking, well, would you be the guinea pig?
Yeah.
Where if I look at this question, it's like, well, once everybody else has taken it and they didn't lose like their arms and legs, then maybe I would be willing to take this vaccine. So how do you force everybody to take the vaccine? You know, how do you choose the people who get the vaccine first? What's that?
That's not a thing to force everybody. Like at gunpoint, what do you mean force everybody?
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how you would do it.
In a lot of ways, we do kind of twist people's arms, though, right, for vaccines. I mean, through institutions like schools, right? Like, I mean, but I do think you bring up a good point that, like, it's so much more salient right now for people, right? Like, I don't know anybody who died from tuberculosis. At least I don't think I do. I don't know anybody who's died from measles. I don't know, you know. So you could almost understand somebody, you know, the anti-vaxxers, right? I'm not going to pat them on the back too much, but I'm just saying you can, if you don't see that risk, if you never see that risk, and you're asking me to take some risk, which is a vaccine, right? There's some risk associated with, even if it's almost zero, it's non-zero, right? And so you're asking me to do that for something I can't see, that I've never seen, that I don't know anybody. And so
you got to go back to your first question though. The number of deaths reported, do you believe it's over-reported, under-reported, or correct?
Yeah.
The people, my guess is the people that are on one end of the spectrum in that question are the same people that are on the same end of the spectrum in your vaccine question. So for them, they don't see the risk.
Yeah.
They think this is all fake news.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I know we should definitely look at that.
The correlation between these two scales would be super interesting.
Yeah, because that's a great point. Like you said, I mean, if you know, so maybe it isn't salient for some people, right? Like you're right. If the risk is zero, then no, that's exactly right. And then then the vaccine is some risk, right? So you're asking me to take some risk for something. Actually, it's almost more damning, right? Because at least we know measles existed or something, right? Because so you can say, well, this is all made up. This is all political. It's all made up. So actually now you're trying, well, of course, we've already seen things like, you know, Bill Gates is trying to control us with vaccines, you know, around this. So yeah, it's a great point. So it actually can even like go awry even worse than something that is more documented, at least historically.
Especially after the AstraZeneca news, I think you're going to have that big risk.
Right.
Okay. So while we've been talking about coronavirus more broadly, the survey at least started out initially with trying to track how people feel about their food sources. Okay. So before we get too deep into what people imagine, this I think is important to point out here. The CDC has made it very clear that there is no evidence to suggest that handling food or consuming food is associated with COVID-19. Okay, so food, according to the CDC, has been basically exempted from any concern in your mind that like you need to worry about, you know, I don't know, sanitizing your takeout or, but because eating food, so long as you follow basic food safety principles, is going to be okay.
Got it.
And yet, what's that?
Got it. I've got my priors. Give me the punch.
And yet, the first thing that I think we should point out is that if you ask this question of when evaluating scientific advice about safe food purchasing behavior, so like wearing a mask when shopping for groceries, do you find yourself following all of the advice, some of the advice, or mostly ignoring the advice from scientists? Now, most people say they follow all of the advice of safe food and behavior. And that's comforting, honestly. What's not comforting is the it was about 10% of the sample
Yeah.
who mostly ignore scientific advice about safe food purchasing behavior.
And
That's
again,
That's a
weird.
hilarious answer. I just really want to meet those people.
but again, it comes back to this point where we really need to look at, I mean, I'm not really a fan of like writing determinist papers anymore. Like I hate writing that stuff. Like, you know, people with higher income do this. But I think there is something here that would be good to dig in a little bit about who these people are, in the sense that it might be a lot, like you were saying, a lot of overlap between some of these, because again, if they think there's no risk, right? Like then they don't want to be, right?
Good
They don't
point.
want to be the sheep. They don't want to be the sheep that's wearing a mask because they know better.
The sheep. I just want to point out though, that maybe you guys' Facebook doesn't look like my Facebook, but I have a whole bunch of people on my Facebook that claim to not be wearing masks, but in doing so, they're following scientific advice, or they're claiming that they're following scientific advice to not wear masks. So I want to believe this is really good news that the vast majority of people are complying with CDC guidelines. I'm not sure I can totally believe that this is what that answer is. It could be both sides of the mask debate are answering that they're following scientific advice.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, Alex, you have fewer Facebook friends than I do, I'm sure.
Citations, Facebook friends, you're just hitting me today, man.
and like, what is this, 2002? We're bragging about Facebook friends. I mean,
you should see my MySpace, Trey.
With my million Facebook
that's
friends.
the sickest layout you'll ever see.
Even with my million Facebook friends, I don't see all of them in my feed. I see the people who I think the algorithm selects the people who get the most likes on their posts, and that tends to be the people who say the most extreme thing, whatever that thing might be.
Right.
And so I would argue that 10% of people who are ignoring all scientific advice are being overweighted by the Facebook algorithm.
Hold on though, that's the opposite thing that I'm saying. Well, it's not the opposite thing.
You're seeing on Facebook that everybody says they're not wearing a mask because of their science versus somebody else's science.
Right, and so they would show up in the top bar in my story. And so I'm saying, I see your argument that they may show up in the top bar, but they would be a small slice of that top bar. But that is potentially a thing that makes this harder to interpret.
I understand what you're saying. That people who aren't wearing a mask could still say that I'm following the advice.
Right.
And it's probably also fair to say that science is a method, right? So trying to follow scientists is kind of maybe an abstract concept for people, because like everybody locks into their one study and they say that that's how the world works.
Yeah. So they can tick that box.
Yeah. I don't know. How many people do you think, if you were to ask a question, do you hate science? Do you trust science?
So we've used a trust in science scale quite a few times, like in some in a gene editing thing we're working on now. In general, at least the self-reported trust is very high. If some of the literature though will say like it's usually like, so it's high so science as a whole, right? So when it's just as a broad, but then when you start getting into domain specific issues, right? Maybe like the safety of GMOs, then it gets a lot more funky when you actually start defining domains.
So speaking of domains,
that's technology, I guess, that's a specific technology versus science, meaning some field of study or knowledge accumulation.
Exactly. And very likely when you ask that, maybe somebody, is envisioning, like they're a science history, or a high school science teacher or something, right? Like, I think they're thinking about it mostly like that, not necessarily like government organizations or scientific bodies, right? They're not thinking of the national academies, right?
Well, and I think about, I'm sure both of you saw the Gallup data yesterday about how like agri-food is the most positively viewed industry in the country right now. You see that like agriculture is number one, grocery stores and then like restaurants are the top 3 or something like that. And it was just kind of amazing to see that. And so I wonder if I asked specific scientific questions about agriculture, if there is this wrinkle here. But either way, 10% of my sample, regardless of the confound of the other ones, are still saying that they don't even, they just do not follow. They ignore science, which is weird.
It's super weird.
Yeah, it's higher than I would have thought.
Okay, so because we're food economists, one thing that we're also very interested in is how this behavior influences the way that people are shopping, like how they're buying their food when they actually do buy their stuff. And, you know, we've talked about how restaurant sales plummeted year over year by like 51% in March, and I think 37% in April, where grocery store sales, food at home increased, not to the same level, but it did increase year over year. But each of us have gone into a different grocery store, and we've seen that there are different protocols that have been put in place at different places. So the and some of it is regulatory, right? So some of it is mandated by the government that everybody has to wear a mask, for example. But some of it isn't. Some of it is people trying to do the right thing for their shoppers. And so what we asked was basically, how comfortable are you with these different mitigating techniques that these food retailers are using for you?
Can I just lawyer again and just ask what that means, how comfortable you are about it?
Yeah, so you know, when we were starting this too, you know, everything was going crazy. We really wanted more information about what people were thinking, how they were feeling about these changes that they were seeing in retailers, and if it, you know, made them feel more comfortable to, you know, be in the store, right? So this was, you know, what we thought would be important information to retailers to, you know, explain to them, this makes people feel better, right? Like this makes people feel at ease. So that's kind of a way to think about it, right? So so on the left side, you see these numbers, and the numbers are going to vary from 1 to 5, right? 1 being extremely uncomfortable, 5, so a 5-point Likert scale, 5 being extremely comfortable. So you can see in general, like these things do help people to feel better, a little bit more.
But let me just, I see your scale now, but
Right.
I'm just wondering what you mean by comfortable. So does that mean I feel relieved that this decreases my risk of disease, or, oh my gosh, I'm living in a dystopian future where everybody wears masks all the time?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you know, yeah, there's room for interpretation, right, at the individual level for sure. So it's how somebody interprets it. And that you know, mechanism that's going on with that is difficult to know, right? It's going to vary.
So one thing that I'll point out is that these values have been way stable over the last few months. So like one thing that we thought we were going to be picking up was that there was going to be some change, right? That like at the beginning of this whole pandemic, all employees wearing masks would be like uncomfortable for folks. And then over time, it would become more comfortable. We're really not seeing that so much in the data.
Is that right?
The
stability is super interesting here.
Yeah. And, you know, these are different people every month, right? You know, and so it's interesting that, you know, it just, I mean, yeah, it's just, and a lot of our questions, I mean, that's kind of the thing that kind of stinks a little bit, right? Is we want to pick up some variation over time and stuff, you know, and the way we realize is like, these things are they're pretty stable.
Yeah. So in this one, people don't like gloves like at all. Like the idea of gloves, it makes them less comfortable with the combination of.
We'll start with that far right side. Start with the far right side. I mean, that's kind of fascinating to me, right? That like people don't want to just have to pick up their food. Like that makes them feel more uncomfortable than actually going into the store.
I just worry what that means, because I also agree that, so we primarily do the curbside pickup thing, but it's also a freaking dystopia, right? Where all of a sudden I don't get to interact with people in public. That makes me feel uncomfortable. That doesn't mean that it makes me, it changes my demand curve. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's a psychological thing that doesn't translate into a behavioral thing in my mind.
You don't think that changes to that shifts your demand curve?
Well, you're right. You're right. It does.
I think it totally changes your demand
it's
curve.
not.
Regardless
It reduces the
psychological underpinning. My demand curve has shifted because of the discomfort that I experienced by doing these things.
and I'll make a big leap here, but you know what, you know, this is something to like spur something else, right? In the sense that what for sure this could, if you're a retailer, what this could be informing you is that people might be a lot less or more likely to substitute to something like online shopping if you don't let them in the store, right? I mean, and so making a big leap there, but that's a possibility, right? And so at least it informs retailers that like, look, you know, you might start creating more substitution effects, or people are not going to be happy if you think this is the way to answer it, right?
Yep.
I'm hesitant to make that conclusion from this information. I think that's something you guys should definitely look at going forward, that substitutability of options. It just,
No,
I'm
the
not there
substitution
yet on
effect,
this.
the change over time is something else that I really want to highlight. We're kind of running out of time, actually.
Oh my
We got
gosh,
60.
we are.
So this is a question of your concern about getting COVID from eating food or purchasing food, or eating food / purchasing food or purchasing food. I think the top.
Hold on. What?
The top got cut off.
You just said eating food and purchasing food so many times.
I know, you're right. Okay, so what we're trying to track here is that, like, so think back to this slide that we threw up earlier about how people, there it is, people, when they eat out at restaurants, they're more likely to get some type of coronavirus symptom. Now, we started running this survey before this was a thing people were talking about, actually. Like, so we were trying to figure out what is it that like might have some type of effect on like the relationship between food and where you eat food and getting coronavirus. So then we asked this question about, I'm concerned with getting coronavirus from where I go to eat or where I go to get my food, or I'm just actually concerned about the coronavirus from my food in general. Okay. So you shouldn't worry about getting coronavirus from your food in general. We've established that's a truism, that like, just don't worry about getting it from your specific food product.
That's what the gray is. The gray is I'm concerned about like fomite transmission from stuff on my food. Eating. Okay.
Yeah, and not just like more concerned, right, than shopping, which obviously you should be more concerned about the shopping aspect than eating the food. You know, that's when you're going to get it, is during the shopping process.
So what you would expect is really the blue and the yellow would be the two biggest ones, and they are. So not concerned about getting it would be the people who, again, are going out and shopping and are going to restaurants or whatever. They just aren't concerned. It's the same people that might think that, you know, we're over-reporting coronavirus cases, for example. Yeah, possibly. Again, we've got the data. We just need to do the analysis. The next piece of this is people who are concerned about getting it while purchasing. You know, they're more concerned at 40%, more or less, 35 to 40% of the sample are correctly more concerned about getting COVID-19 from purchasing their food. Now, the orange and the gray are the big concern group here for me. A third of our sample is concerned about getting coronavirus from eating food.
So you've made clear that we're not talking about restaurant consumption when you say eating food. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I got cut off on the top. The really strange one is the gray version here. So we've actually seen an increase in concern about getting coronavirus from the food you eat from May to August.
Yeah, July and August, you know, it looks like it's kind of plateaued, maybe even decreasing a little bit. But yeah, there was an initial increase.
Could that be a change in people's behavior in terms of the type of stuff they're eating? So even though I'm not concerned about, you've made clear it's not the restaurant, but I myself, we are doing pickup more often. We're going through the drive-through more often.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though there doesn't seem to be a large risk associated with food, there is an increased risk in terms of that my underlying behaviors changed in terms of responding to this question.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, like, is it really a news story, right? They created a jump that people are now worried about food, or is it that people, you know, that's a great point, are exposing themselves to food that they think might be more likely to have it. Yeah.
So we did ask a bunch of questions in there about like how you're getting your food, so that we can actually control for that in the paper if we need to.
I'm
But
just
I think
interested in
that's a
in the
good
changes
question.
in purchasing behavior and
No, you're exactly right. Like, we didn't go out. Actually, like, we're going to go to dinner here in a little bit, but because they've by us, they've shut down 2 blocks. So like we live like right by like a little happening area that's got restaurants and bars and stuff, and they've started doing outdoor dining. So they, like, on the Fridays and Saturday nights, they shut down the street, and they've got like picnic tables out there, and everything's really well spaced. And yeah, we definitely wouldn't have done that not too long ago, right? Well, they hadn't even thought to have put something like that in place, but it's really been great. We go to dinner on the weekends. We'll go like one night during the weekend, and it's been really nice, and it like feels somewhat normal. Seeing people out.
We've got that too, except for that it's down there in the massive college students. So there's just tons of people, and the people that happen to be there are the riskiest population. That it just isn't as much of a paradise from my perception.
Yeah, no, that's tough. Yeah, no, this where I'm at is, I'm about 20 minutes north of our campus because it's in Newark, which is spelled like Newark, but that's what they say in Jersey.
I've never heard that pronounced before. Okay.
So that's what they say in Jersey, but in Delaware it's Newark. Yeah. So but yeah, so we don't. When I'm out there, I'm not with the student population, and you're right. I probably would feel a little bit differently if that were the case.
Trey, you got other points, or should we wrap it up there?
I mean, I've got a million things that I'm thinking about. I think the research that's going to come out of coronavirus is going to be like so interesting to see, especially on the psychology of science and science communication and the effectiveness of science communication. Honestly, the thing that really pops out to me from this data is that I don't think we're doing a very good job of communicating findings from science. The stability of our results over 4 months is kind of concerning, honestly. Like I don't know about you, but I feel like I've changed my behavior in 4 months. Like the more we learn, I try to update my choices, but it sure doesn't look like most people are doing that. And so I think it highlights that we need to do a better job of meeting people where they are. And I'm not sure that most of science communications successfully bridge that gap yet. What do you think, Brandon?
Well, it's hard to know. Even before something like this, right, with science communication and things like GMOs, people are busy, right? People have lives, they've got families, they've got jobs, they've got added stress of worrying about those jobs and the family, and so people have a lot to, they've got a lot going on. And I see what you're saying. I agree with you, meeting them where they are. But even then, I just don't know that they're ready to receive it, right, or even want to. I think it's difficult to get people to think about things that aren't immediately affecting them personally or their loved ones.
Yeah, and I guess it goes to, like, if you talk to a political scientist, they think about politics all the time. And so, like, they're shocked at when presidential approval ratings don't respond to some new revelation, right? Because, like, well, all of my friends are talking about this new revelation, and yet, like, it's not abundantly clear that anybody else is even paying attention to that new revelation. Yeah. And in economics, it's the same thing. Like, I think about economics all the time, and it's weird to me that people don't think about economics all the time. And so, like, trying to take a step back and think about like the average person or the groups of people who are making up the United States, I think it highlights this gap that I don't know how to overcome.
Yeah, well, and I think from a resource standpoint, you're making a lot of good points in the sense that we probably shouldn't focus on the average person, right? If we're from a resource standpoint, depending on what the issue is, we need to focus, whatever the at-risk population is, or whether it be, if it's not this, if it's something like who's the movable middle, right? Like,
yeah, the person that you can change at the margin. That was an interesting insight. Cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. I think so. Brandon, you've done more science communication research than any of us. What's the most effective way to talk to that margin?
Well, so I mean that's an evolving thing, right? Like, this has become. I do get annoyed now, like when I see people in papers talk about science communication kind of like passingly, like just mention it, right? Like this is now like a field, right, of study. And I've just seen now people just tack it onto a paper like, oh, the science communication implications. And it's like, but so so all that to say, it's a field. It's now really, it's evolving, right? And we've all, likely if you're in this area, you've heard things like leading with values, right? Meeting people, like you said, meeting where they are, but also understanding their values, trying to meet them at their values. There's ideas like narratives, right? So instead of information like this is safe, like actually tell a story, right? About like stories resonate more. So narratives are important. So there are a lot of evolving issues like that. But to be honest, it's still not clear to me how if all these things actually hold up empirically.
I think we need to have another closing bell with Brandon talking about exactly that issue, because I'm just holding back all of these comments because it's 4:04.
Yeah. I think science communication is something that we should be talking about more and more. So
I got a forthcoming paper in AEPP we can talk about then. That's pretty close to some of this stuff.
Perfect.
You might find it interesting. And it's about the difference in perceptions too of gene editing and gene drive.
Cool.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks guys for talking. Brandon, thanks for joining us. Hope we didn't keep you from dinner too long.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you joining. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see y'all next week. Take care.
Bye guys.